Okay, let's go to Representative DeVillier. HB 506. Representative DeVillier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and honorable members, friends, and Lance Harris. Today I have House Bill 506, which as originally introduced was a severance tax rate reduction bill. The reason I'm bringing this piece of legislation is over my first 4 years of being a representative, I had the privilege of going and meeting with a lot of different service and businesses for the oil and gas industry in my district. And what I noticed throughout the years was that a lot of the businesses were either closing or the ones that were staying open, their employees may live in Louisiana, but they were working in other states. And just through visiting with these different industries, I was trying to find out what we can do as legislators to try to bring jobs back to the state of Louisiana. And there was essentially 3 different things that they really and truthfully felt would help the industry come back to Louisiana and bring the jobs. One of which would be if we would address our extremely high severance tax. Today we charge our oil industry 12.5% on the severance tax. If you look at Texas, they have 4.6%, Oklahoma 7%, Alabama 2%, Arkansas 5%, New Mexico 3.75%. So in an effort to make our state more competitive and attractive to the oil and gas industry, we drafted this piece of legislation, which essentially starts a phase down of our severance tax on oil from 12.5% down to 8.5%. And it's 0.5% per year starting next fiscal year. Since we started session, we've all been made aware of the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you've paid attention to what's happened in the oil industry, the demand globally has been reduced greatly. And we even saw a time where the price of oil went below $1. The break-even point for the oil industry is $37 per barrel. So we drafted an amendment and brought it to Ways and Means Committee, which would basically, for 1 year, it would sunset after 1 year. Anytime the price of oil falls below $30 a barrel, it would trigger an 80% reduction in the severance tax. And anytime gas would fall below $1.90, it would trigger an 80% reduction in gas. That amendment did get on, and we have heard concerns, especially from the local governments, of how that would affect their budgets. And I've learned a lot about that, and certainly want to try to do what we can to not hurt some of these budgets, to try to minimize the impact, because the impact with these jobs losses have been great already. With that being said, I'll take any questions. I also have Gifford Briggs with me. He has been a great resource for me for a lot of the questions that members have asked. So I would ask that you would allow him to introduce himself and join me in answering some of the questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
DeVillier. Mr. Briggs.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Gifford Briggs, President, Louisiana Oil and Gas Association. I don't get to come to the Appropriations Committee very often, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. As Representative DeVillier said, there's really 2 parts of the legislation. One is the phase down from 12.5% to 8.5%. Ideally, we would like for it to happen much faster and be in more aggressively, but we understand the challenges that brings to the state fiscal office and local governments as well. And I think the approach that Representative DeVillier has taken in this legislation is probably the best path forward to get us to the goal of being more competitive. In today's environment, coming out of COVID and seeing activity plummet around the world as prices rebound, which we're excited about $32 today, which shows you just how bad it has been. We are going to have to compete in manners and in ways that we never did before. And every percent of return on an investment is going to matter. And so this legislation, I think, is crucially important. The amendment that was put on in committee is a direct reflect of where we are dealing with the COVID issue. We know that the oil and gas industry was hit particularly hard in Louisiana, at negative $37 oil at one point in time. The amendment was designed to have the price triggers on there in order so that, if prices stayed below $30, which fortunately they're not today, or for some reason we have to return to some sort of economic shutdown and prices fall below 30 again, that we can provide a way that producers can keep wells flowing. We did a survey of our members, and they indicated that 4 out of 5 members have started shutting wells in. They'd laid off 23% of their workforce, and another 27% were coming. And so if we can bring the cost down for these wells, maybe during these really challenging times, which $30 oil, to give you perspective, is the lowest in recorded history when adjusted for inflation. So this isn't some abnormal amount. And the amendment reduced the reduction or provided a reduction of 80% to provide some revenue for the state to be able to provide a supplemental match for the locals to account for the revenue that they would lose. We have been communicating with local governments and the Police Jury Association before the amendment was filed to try and identify a solution. I made a commitment to Mr. Cormier, who I'm sure is going to come up here in a little bit, hopefully with a green card, to work with him, that if we could not find a solution that would work for the Police Jury Association and local government, that we would pull the bill down, because we understand we want to be partners. The risk is, if the amendment doesn't stay on, that prices stay below 30, we shut in a lot of production, we lose more jobs, and we only compound the damage that could be done from industry. Perfect universe, oil's above $30 the entire year, natural gas is above $1.90 the whole year, and it doesn't matter that the amendment's even on there because it wouldn't come into play. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Oh, yes, Representative.
Representative Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Gifford, for being here, and Representative DeVillier. I think we're all watching the price of oil, looking at what Saudi Arabia and what Russia's doing. I mean, I've been watching international news just trying to get a grip on it. And also I'm also watching, I grew up in the energy space, and I'm also watching what Texas is doing. I know that Texas has the Texas Railroad Commission that really regulates the price of, helps try to regulate the price of oil in Texas. Do we have anything similar in Louisiana that helps us, or is it every producer, every entity makes its own decisions? We don't have that sort of regulatory scheme.
Yeah, so the comparison in Louisiana to the Texas Railroad Commission is the Office of Conservation. They can't really regulate price in Texas, but they have some levers that they don't ever really use to provide production limitations. And actually, they had a meeting at the earlier part of when COVID hit to discuss whether or not they wanted to put production limitations in place. And after an 8-hour hearing, they ultimately decided that they did not want to do that. There's been some discussion about whether it could be done in Louisiana or whether it could be done nationally. But what we're seeing also is that market forces are coming to bear, and we're seeing U.S. production has been reduced by a couple million barrels per day. Not because anyone said you can't produce more, but because it's just not profitable. So we've seen the rig count plunge from 600 down to 400, and they're expecting to get to low as 2.
And so, listen, I'm following it, and I know that many of our companies are suffering who are dealing with it. Obviously, I'm looking at the fiscal note and just how do we pay for it? That's just overwhelming. I'm looking at $105 million over 5 years. DeVillier, whoever, how do you pay for it? I certainly appreciate the need for this industry. We rely upon our oil and gas industry here in Louisiana. It's suffering greatly. And how do we pay for it, though?
Yeah, I'd like to take a shot at answering that, Rep. Carter, and I always appreciate your questions. So when you look at the fiscal note, and obviously it should raise some questions on how we're going to pay for this, and over a 5-year total, you're talking about, a little over $100 million. This year, going into this fiscal year, as you're well aware on this committee, we had a really decent-sized surplus, and I think that surplus is from overtaxation. That's one thing I'd like to mention. The second thing is when you look at the production over the last 20 years, okay, because we charge per barrel of oil. It's not for the price of oil, the taxes, it's per barrel. So when you look at the amount of oil that's been produced from, let's just say, I think it's 1991, looked like we had a total of about 114 million barrels of oil. In 2019, we had 35 million. So when you look at not only the way we tax here on our severance tax side, but all the other things that we do against the oil and gas industry, it is driving that industry out. And that industry affects more than just the producers. It hurts your car dealerships. It hurts your realtors on selling homes. It hurts all of your supply companies. So it does a lot more. And as you can just look, and I can show you the chart, the reduction year in and year out, the collections are going to go down as well. So if we don't do something now to show them that we want a better climate for them to come and produce, your note is going to continue, I guess, to grow without doing anything. And on the flip side of that, I'd like to say, if we do something and we start showing the industry that we do want them here and we appreciate all of the jobs that they bring, that is going to recreate a tax base that we haven't seen in a long time.
And that's
We're at
actually
3
what
minutes, gentlemen, too.
I'm sorry. My last question will be this, and then I'll shut up and listen. We can continue to have the conversation. I'm looking at the fiscal note of $105 million, but I'm also wondering what's the investment on that? What's the expected rate of return? That if we do this sort of investment, that what can we expect from the oil and gas? I mean, no, we can't obviously predict the price of oil going forward. I mean, look at it. Our budget was based on 59, and now we're at 32. So, I mean, what's the expected, if we do go down this path, what's the expected return to the state of Louisiana? I know we're under 3 limits. This is a bigger conversation, and we'll continue to have this talk.
Well, if I just take a quick shot at that, Representative Carter, I mean, look, this is not I'm not going to sit up here and say, well, if you drop it by 0.5%, that it's going to automatically equal this much production. The reality is that we at some point we're going to have to make a decision on whether we want to continue to attract people to drill for oil and natural gas in the state. The difference between the natural gas and oil severance tax in the state is huge. They're different formulas, but roughly natural gas may be taxed at 3 or 4%, and oil is taxed at 12. We've got 22 rigs running in North Louisiana, all in the Haynesville Shale, producing gas. We've got 0 in South Louisiana, where you would see them producing for oil. And so if we want to continue to try and compete, we didn't have to used to compete. If you had a company in Lafayette, you drilled in St. Martinville. Now we're competing globally. So if we want to attract that investment for oil, we're going to have to try and make it more competitive from a financial standpoint, a legal standpoint, and a regulatory standpoint.
Okay, there's no other question, but I have a few, Mr. Briggs, but also to Representative DeVillier, to both, I guess. And you both know, I mean, when I put on my representative hat, oil and gas is so critical to our region, our area. So I want to do anything and everything possible to encourage and enhance and entice the industry to invest. But as within sitting in now, as within appropriations, there's obviously some questions and issues. And one is, obviously, y'all know the price of oil fluctuates by minute, and there are different oil prices. If WTI changes and that's below, or if it's not. But then if Brent drops, which indices are we going to actually use, or is it both, is one question.
Yeah, to that point, we actually going to charge what we will be using what's charged at the collection, essentially.
Right, so it's value, the time and place of severance. When we report our severance taxes to the Department of Natural Resources, we have to indicate the price per barrel that we as a producer sold the product for. So that would be the determining factor of whether or not the rate below $30 would apply.
And it's, as you know, it's been fluctuating so much on a weekly, monthly basis. How is that factored in as well?
But so typically speaking, on an operator, they pay on a monthly basis, and so depending upon their contract determines how that price is determined. There's a few different ways. In most cases, It's a rolling average, so the price of, and they may base it off West Texas Intermediate, and they look at that price every day, and they take the rolling average for that entire month. And then there's generally a factor. So light sweet crude typically is a plus to West Texas Intermediate. So depending on the volume you're producing and how the high quality it is, it might be the average of West Texas Intermediate over this past month plus $5 or plus $4 depending upon the contract.
So who's tracking that, and how, you said on a monthly, so it'd be a rolling average, but who would actually be doing that?
Correct. Well, that's already done, existing. So when we remit to the Department of Revenue, we have to indicate to them the volume of production that's also reported to the Office of Conservation and the rate, the dollar value in which we paid for in which we sold the product for, which indicates what we pay the severance tax on.
Okay.